Chapter 36. Routine. All the pressure withdrew, and a voice sounded out. "Are you okay?" Unexpectedly, the voice was gentle and filled with excitement, completely contrasting the dominating and violent pressure the stranger gave off a moment ago. He tapped on his badge before focusing his attention back to her. "Yes, I'm all right." "Good. Do you need something? Something to eat? To drink?"
Infine.
My village was attacked. My parents, Dad, sacrificed himself to save." Her voice became quieter as she mumbled to herself, seemingly not wanting to believe her own words. While she was deep in thoughts, the city lord appeared in the room, without the woman noticing. "What's your name?" Broly asked the woman, who was still mumbling to herself, coming out of daze, as she looked at Broly. "Violet," she responded in a quiet voice.
Hey Violet, I'm Broly.
"You are in Elpis now. I swear nothing can hurt you anymore," he answered with a smile. "I don't know what you are feeling right now, but I need you to be strong now. Tell us what happened, so we can stop whatever attacked your village, so it can't hurt anybody else," Broly said while holding her hand tightly. She looked at him, repeating the words, "be strong," in her head. She took a deep breath. "The CE attacked us." She recounted all that she saw, tried to remember the number and appearance of the CE, and any other details she could think of. "Well done, Violet. Now rest well, we will take care of the rest. You have helped us tremendously." Broly was about to leave with the city lord, before she screamed out, "Wait, I want to join the army." The army of the city, Elpis, was entirely trained for the battles against the CE. They were at the front line, fighting and protecting the city and the villages in the vicinity. "All right, I will send someone to pick you up." The city lord wanted to reject her at first, but after he saw the resolve in the young woman's eyes, he knew that she would find other ways to confront the CEs in the future to take revenge. It would be better if she had others to support her. They went back to the city's hall for emergencies. Here, all the heads of the various races were already assembled to hear what she said after waking up. Broly was the only one who wasn't a leader, but as the champion, the other races acknowledged him with a nod. There were a lot of races involved other than the 10 warrior races, which participated in the tournament. All the other races were mostly who were fonder of brains than brawn, as they would say it. They were the reason why the city was a scientifically developed on. All the training rooms were also invented by them. Broly was a bit confused by the point. If they had the technology, why didn't they leave? It wouldn't be that difficult to move everyone in the time span of a few years with the technology they had on hands. He could accept the fact that they didn't want to abandon their home planet, but they are risking going instinct to stay here, and they aren't a warrior race to begin with. The discussion became heated, as they didn't know how much weight they can put on Violet's story. They couldn't accumulate much in 1 year time to last them and all the villagers, who will be coming, for long. Usually the attack would only last a month, as long as the moon is up, but now it would be indefinite. Maybe now they would send all their hidden forces to attack. They couldn't be sure that it wouldn't last longer than the rations they have. They are testing the waters now. If it was as usual, we would have a few days to come up with a solution, but for now we should call in an emergency situation, calling the villagers back for protection, temporarily at least. After the meeting was called off, the city lord asked Broly about his situation, feeling that Broly was a bit different than before. Before, a bit of aura would always leak out, but now, he couldn't sense anything. "I completed my control." The city lord widened his eyes a bit. This would only mean that Broly's progress would only accelerate. The city lord looked forward, what Broly would show him in the future, to what extent he would grow. "So, what do you want to do now? More missions?" "For now, no. I will wait here and train. The current me would be of limited use, but once I achieve one of my goals, I will be unstoppable on this planet." Broly's eyes were practically gleaming as he talked. "Oh, pretty confident for a 3-year-old. I hope you will surprise me." For the next days, the city was flocked with thousands of people from all kinds of races. There were more and more reports of CE sightings. Few of the CE were killed, but they didn't initiate a large-scale attack. With the exception of a few villages, it was pretty much quiet. However, they did attack Elpis at one point. Broly saw their futile attempt of attacking the city's barrier, before being killed by the guards. Another week passed before the CE retracted towards the far north, seemingly gathering into a single place. Usually they would all retract to different directions, but now they focused on one point. It was an unfound behavior from them, therefore, making their retreat from an initial happy event to an anxious one. Broly was still training undisturbed by those happenings anymore. This time he wasn't meditating, he was done with controlling his center. Now it was time for him to train his body. Although he didn't completely erase meditating from his routine, the last few days were just physical training under 400G in the gravity chamber, doing basic bodyweight training that he did in his past life. He spent hours in there before he went to the other disciples, who were training in their respective training rooms, for a spar. He would usually battle it out with Zinjo or a Trog for close combat, before going to Yanari to have a taste of her white feather shot, and Blitz for his incredible speed to train his mobility and speed. He was increasing tremendously after each and every battle he had. So much it frightened the others, putting them under a lot of competitive pressure. He always saved the best for last. He loved to fight against Aaliyah, as she always polished her techniques and movements. Her talent for martial arts were top class. In terms of using her strength in the most effective way, she was considered the best amongst the disciples. He was learning a lot from her. Adapting to her way of fighting only made his movements increasingly sharp. Of course, Aaliyah progressed in leaps and bounds as well. To be exact, every sparring partner from Broly did. Since it was rare to have such a dangerous sparring partner, who could not only dodge most attacks but also just bulldoze through attacks without flinching, if he wanted to. Against him, they were constantly on alert, if they didn't want to be punched into a wall. Chapter 37. Ozuru. After a month, the CE were nowhere to be seen again, and showed no sign to attack again before the moon would show up. For the next year, Broly had been training every day. He not only trained under heavy gravity, but also sparred with everyone he could find. He quickly became an unstoppable force in the close combat department. But his key technique was by no means weak. He invented a few techniques and became more adept in it. He was not the best in ki manipulation, as his ki inherited the violent nature after he took over control, making ki manipulation a bit harder. Of course, no one would engage in a ki contest with him, as he could just brute force himself to victory. After a while, he even started asking for pointers from other race leaders, or their strongest fighter, to push himself even further. Many accepted the request as they could gauge his strength and train their fighters. Certainly, advantageous for all the parties involved. With every training and sparring session, he became stronger, but strangely enough, although he thought that he should be able to access his Super Saiyan form already, he couldn't. He observed his S cells and found out that it had something to do with the mother blood crystal. It appeared that because the cells were elevated to greater heights, they were less receptive to mutation. They needed much more energy to mutate. Although it pushed his transformation a bit back, he could feel that he would only benefit from this postponement. Since his Super Saiyan mode was delayed for now, he wanted to learn the next best thing, Great Ape, or alternatively called Ozuru transformation. He would have to learn it either way, as it may give him clues about the transformation into Super Saiyan 4, even though he was not sure if it is a real from, as it was said to be non-canon. But he couldn't help but feel that it is, since he himself shouldn't be canon as well, that is if he ignored the new Broly movie. So, since the possibility was there, he would investigate it. Even if he couldn't achieve Super Saiyan 4, he would at least have learned more about his body, which shouldn't be a bad thing. There were few Saiyan elites that could control themselves as Ozarus, but only one was able to create a power ball, an energy sphere used for a replacement for an absent moon. It created Blutz waves like any other celestial body when it reflects rays of sunlight. It took him a month to master this technique. Now he was on an open field meditating to steady his mind for the transformation, as he wasn't sure how he would react to the Ozuru form. The City Lord assisted him, as he was probably the only one strong enough if Broly lost control. Although his base power wouldn't be enough to contain Broly in an accident, but as most from the Hera race, he could transform, tripling his base power of 50 million, resulting in a battle power of 150 million. It should be more than enough for Broly, who approached 100 million after his strength increased tenfold. After meditating for an hour, he stood up and created the power ball before throwing it into the sky. He stared at it for a while until he noticed his life force from his tail going into a turmoil. The power started coursing through his veins, burning inside him. Suddenly his mind went blank. The City Lord stared at Broly, seeing the pupils going completely white. Fangs started to appear, and his head shape changed to one of an ape. Broly's body started rapidly growing, and with it his hair all around his body. After a few moments his body was covered in fur. His eyes were now dyed in a blood-red tint. Broly only stopped increasing in size until he stood at a 30-meter height. Grower, a giant ape exuding a tremendous amount of power, was standing in front of the City Lord, roaring into the sky. The City Lord saw Broly notice him. He looked over and opened his mouth, sensing that something didn't seem right, as he couldn't sense any intelligence in the eyes of the giant ape in front of him. "Hey Broly, are you L-? Before he could finish, he saw ki gathering inside Broly's mouth. The City Lord instantly transformed. His bluish skin changed to a lime green and his eyebrows and hair turned red. His muscles increased dramatically. He crossed his arms in front of him to block the incoming attack. He waited for a second before putting his guard down to look. Growl. He saw the giant ape lying down onto the ground while clutching his head in pain. Arg! Broly suddenly beat his own head. The City Lord looked tensely at the happenings in front of him. Although he offered a helping hand, he would rather avoid the fight with the beast. He was more interested in the transformation itself, and how it would be influenced by the increasing life force. He could only get information if Broly was conscious and actually remembers what happens. He looked at the power ball in the sky before sending a ki blast at it, destroying it in the process. The City Lord waited it out as Broly struggled to regain his consciousness. In Broly's perspective, he was currently fighting for supremacy in his head, his subconscious taking over, pushing his conscious to the back. Maybe it was because of his meditations or his previous experience of fighting over control, but he started to win and retained his conscience slowly. A few minutes later, after rolling around and smashing small hills, Broly stopped moving. He slowly stood up and looked around, seeing the destruction he caused. The city lord, already in his base form, sat on a rock not far away. "Master, how long was I out?" Broly's voice in his ape form was booming in a low tone, creating airwaves by simply speaking. "Only for a few minutes." "Thank you, Master. If you had put me out early, I feel like it would have been more difficult in the future." "No problem. So, how does it feel?" "Incredible. My body feels like an unstoppable force." Broly started throwing a few punches before realizing that he was around the same speed as before the transformation. "My speed multiplied as well, but my massive size reduced it by quite a bit."
Chapter 38, Aura.
Although my power increased my strength tenfold, but my comparatively slow speed and size makes me a huge target, especially for those who can absorb my life force with every contact. Well, after I can turn into a Super Saiyan, I won't have much use for it. At least until I have full control over the Super Saiyan transformation. "So Broly, how do you feel? How is your life force?" "Everything is normal, I guess. Besides my life force flaring up a bit and rushing through my body, I don't feel much different. Well, I can feel myself being stronger, but it doesn't seem to burden my body. It actually feels pretty nice, to be honest." "Ha ha ha. Well, this is a transformation part of your Saiyan heritage. It should be normal to feel comfortable. Maybe that was how your ancestors looked." "Haha. Maybe. Let's wait for a bit. I want to transform again." I try to retain my conscience immediately. After 10 minutes, Broly started to revert back into his base form. The moment he did, he started panting. Apparently, the transformation's after effects are pretty heavy. The other Saiyans said that the transformation process back to normal is very exhausting. Even Broly needed to take a rest for an hour before being fully recovered again. Thereafter, he transformed hundreds of times over the course of 2 months. At the start, his mind always went blank during and shortly after the transformation, but the duration was lessening with each transformation. There were also few times where he was already exhausted but transformed anyway, resulting in him going on a rampage. Fortunately, the city lord quickly knocked him out, forcing him to revert back. The process of transforming one's body and then trying to regain one's conscience was a very tiring experience for the body and especially for the mind. Unknowingly, Broly trained his mental strength by doing something he was born with. After training for 2 whole months, he managed to remain conscious even during the transformation. He could feel how his body reacted to the blood's waves and how it was triggered. He became increasingly aware about the hidden strength that were inside his cells, which were partly released by the Oozaru transformation. He could by now even use some of this hidden strength without the transformation. He forced the strength out by triggering the life force inside in a similar way the blood's waves do it. But it was incredibly difficult to bring out even 1%. He would need much more time to master it fully. It was different from his SLs, as those were mutations, and because of that he figured that he might be able to stack the effects. It would be something similar to the Golden Great Ape, but instead of transforming into a Super Saiyan while being an Oozaru, one would force the same hidden strength out while being a Super Saiyan. Broly believed that this would result into something different, even though the concepts were the same. Only the sequence would be different. After the initial excitement of the prospect of mastering a strong technique and transformation for the future, he went on to Jine to relax for a few days. He figured after the crazy training he was up to for the last year, he needed some time to rest. His body didn't seem to tremendously rise in strength anymore, so he decided to take a break for a few days. He remembered something from his past life about rest days, which were said to be as important as the workouts. Besides, the giant ape transformation gave him reassurance that he could at least defend himself. Broly wouldn't easily find an opponent other than the CE, and those didn't show up for the last year. With that being said, he figured that he would take the time to relax and ask Jine about the general situation from their race. As he was walking down the street, he was greeted by dozens of people smiling and waving at him. He was kind of getting used to this sight. After all, he was the champion, the strongest of the former youngest generation. With his increasing visits to other races' leaders and top fighters, he was getting more and more famous. His talent for battle was admired by the young warriors, and there even popped up groupies. Although there were girls wanting to throw themselves at him, he wasn't affected by those. He contributed to being only 4 years old with absolutely no libido. Broly was a bit overwhelmed with the situation at first. Being almost overrun by a bunch of strangers can be a bit stressful, but simply by releasing his aura, they parted to make way for him. Aura was something he learned by exchanging for a book called Winning Without Fighting. It basically described how one could pressure the opponent by one's aura. It was different to the aura, which pressured the opponent through ki, as this would only be helpful against much weaker enemies who don't have as much ki as oneself. The aura talked about in the book wasn't an energy-based aura, but one filled with spirit or intent. The aura pressured the opponent through the spirit, challenging the opponent's mental strength. But pressuring was just one use of it. Since it was basically intent, it was perfectly made for feints. The opponent wouldn't realize if the next incoming attack would be real or not, as a feint filled with intent wouldn't easily be able to be distinguished. There were also methods described to attack, but those were more advanced, as those Broly already learned. As he walked through the crowd while releasing his aura, the people just felt an invisible wall pushing them back, even though they were clearly moving by themselves. Making his way towards the headquarters, he saw a military court nearby with several recruits training. The intensity has been apparently increased since the surprise attack. Broly even saw Violet training with the other recruits. After 20 minutes of walking, he arrived at the Saiyans base. Before he could get in and ask for Jine, he saw her supervising the training of the new generation. He went up to greet her. After the time he spent in Elpis, he has long surpassed Jine in height. So, from the outside, it looked like two adults had a conversation with each other, although only one was an adult and the other was a young child. While asking about the situation of the headquarters, he was told that the higher-ups were actually pretty tense about the happenings of the CE. It concerned them as they suddenly attacked 2 years too early, contradicting their usual behavior, and then gathered somewhere in the north. It seems they were preparing for something. In the worst case, they were preparing for a full-out war, so most races were prompted by the city council to increase their supplies and to train harder. Chapter 39. Perditus. Jine, if you are all so concerned, why don't you leave? The technology is more than enough to leave for other planets, isn't it? Sai. Yes, it is. We won't leave, because we can't. In ancient times, the natives tried to leave early on, but they were unsuccessful, or that is what we believe what happened. The City Lord has probably described it to you already, about the 3 origin crystals. The cornerstones of Perditus. Perditus? Ah yes, that's how the planet was referred to in ancient texts. After they arrived in this solar system, the crystals lost their might, and with it, Perditus lost its protection. The outside space was distorted by the planet's teleportation and was incredibly dangerous. Maybe they didn't know, but the natives decided to travel outside and search for their home. That was also the last event the natives were still around. Some say they successfully escaped and never turned back. Others say that they were torn apart by space. Either way, thereafter different species emerged from space rifts on this planet. Fast-forwarding a few thousands of years, and here we are. The outside space still as chaotic as ever. We don't know what would greet us if we flew inside the distorted space. What would greet us on the other side or inside? Would we even be able to survive the space? Most are more afraid of the unknown than some creatures that we have clashed with already. Although they are strong, they aren't unkillable. Rather fight the enemy than face the unknown. Huh. Yes. Now you know why we don't just leave. Ah, Broly, could you do me a favor and fight against the class I'm supervising? I think it would be nice if they spar against someone much stronger than them in their age. Their age? Oh right. Sometimes I forget that I'm only, what is it, 4 years old. Sure, why not? Jine beamed after she heard the answer. She turned towards the children who were sparring with each other and gathered them in front of her and Broly. I have a little surprise for you. The champion from last year's Prodigy tournament agreed to spar with you. You can go all out. He can handle it. She told the group of 8 while slapping Broly's back. He stumbled a bit forward. He regained his balance and was about to say something before being interrupted. Broly, the champion. Wow. Are you really as old as we are? Are you really a Super Saiyan? Why are you so tall? Why do you still have your tail? He was bombarded with questions. He blanked out for a second. He quickly came out of his daze before clearing his throat. Cough. Yes, I am 4 years old. Not a Super Saiyan yet. I like my tail. As for my height, why was he taller than them? With 180 centimeters in height, he was already approaching the original adult's height. If he remembered correctly, as an adult he should become over 2 meters tall. He started to think about it, as he was literally looking down at the group of kids in front of him. They all looked around 13 years of age, but they couldn't even compare to him. From the series he knew that this should be the norm. Kakarot was also only growing after he became 15, getting several growth spurts until he turned 25. It was a Saiyan trait. Saiyans have evolved to have a slowed, aging process upon reaching physical maturity in order to fight longer. But why would they only reach maturity at 25? Why didn't they grow up faster? Aren't Taro and the others a bit too tall as well? Why are we so tall? They should have the same height as the group in front of him, right? What about us? Differentiate us with them. Maybe our strength? Maybe it has something to do with the life force. With more life force and energy pumping through our veins, it would certainly make sense why it would allow us to grow faster. We could also be influenced by the mother blood crystal. After all, it evolved ourselves. Well, either way, doesn't really matter. It is because I'm strong. Now, enough with the questions, let's fight. Without waiting any further, Broly and the group started to fight each other. Needless to say that the group couldn't hold a handle to him. After the sparring session, the group was panting on the ground, while Broly was talking leisurely with Jine. The next morning, he woke up and went outside for a bit, before sparring against the kids again. With them he went to a Saiyan restaurant and had lunch with them. The portions really honored the name of the restaurant, a Saiyan's meal. Broly could barely eat 2 dishes before his stomach threatened to burst. For the evenings, he started to read up on some information about the planet and legends of the crystals he borrowed from the City Lord, as he would try to find and absorb the other 2 crystals as well. This continued for a few days, before he decided to take a break from his rest. Although he sparred a bit with the kids, he was itching for his training. He went back to the City Lord's palace, going straight for the trainings room, shortly meditating under 500G. Still under 500G, he started his workout routine with the basics, deadlifts, bench presses, squats, and other exercises. He had asked some of the scientists to develop him some durable weights which could withstand the high gravity pressure. Although the pulls from the weights were a bit bigger than he was used to, it served its purpose. He segregated his workout routine into weight training, just to increase his strength, martial arts training, so he could use his muscles more efficiently, and ended off by sparring with different opponents. Another year has passed, and he stopped getting stronger. His strength stagnated at around 12 million, which was higher than most in this city, and with the Oozaru form, he would probably only be second to the City Lord. He didn't know why he didn't get any stronger, but he could tell that his S-cells still continued to grow. So, he placed his focus on meditating again. It didn't really affect his base strength, but he could worry about it after he achieved Super Saiyan. Now other problems arrived. It has been 3 years since the CE attacked. Under full moon another attack was incoming. The whole city was tense as they waited on full alert for the enemies to appear. Broly was waiting as well, standing tall on the wall with his assigned group consisting of Ace, Taro, Aaliyah, and Kana.
Chapter 40, war.
Broly watched a swarm of black figures crawling, running, and flying towards Elpis. The villagers were long evacuated to the shelter inside the walls. Still kilometers away, the CE were already bombarded with artillery. Although some races didn't have the muscles to go into the fight themselves, but their weapons could. They armed the weaker ones and mounted huge laser cannons on the top of the walls, constantly firing towards the black swarm. It lit up the night sky with bright lights flashing on and out. Of course, technology only brought them this far. It only thinned out the herd, but it wouldn't be able to hurt the stronger ones. In the first line of defense were the top warriors and leaders of the races, taking head on the strongest of the crowd. Their power level reached into the upper 20 million. Considering they all had trump cards to boost their strength, they were a force to be reckoned with. They were the currently strongest fighters at the front line. Following them were the veterans, experienced warriors through hundreds of battles. There was a total of 5 defense lines slaying every CE the previous line let slip through. At the end, the last line of defense were the disciples of the City Lord protecting the wall and its barrier. Although many of these disciples were statistically stronger than many of the veterans, they lacked experience. Obviously, they knew that the disciples could hold their own in battle, but this was not a fight, it was war. Most of these younglings haven't experienced war, so they were chosen as the last line of defense. The CE would be considerably thinned out by the time they reached the wall, making them perfect targets for the younglings. They could focus on battling only one opponent at the time. Broly watched as the CE battled against Elpis' army. Their enemies were completely obliterated. They couldn't even make it past the first line of defense. Jine and Daz told Broly that the first day would be them testing the waters, trying to see if there was a hole in the defense. This time it appeared that they would only attack from the north, out of the forest, since they gathered there and there were no other places they were sighted. Still, they got scouts scanning the area around the city if some CEs tried to sneak up on them. From experience, the attack would only last an hour before they would retreat again, just to come out at another day with stronger individuals in their ranks. Almost an hour later, the CE still poured towards Elpis. Something is wrong. Weren't the numbers supposed to decrease by now? Aaliyah approached him with similar thoughts. Yes, they should. Prepare for battle. Stay alert. This will be tougher than we thought, Broly shouted, bringing Taro out of his relaxed state. Ace was as serious as ever and Kana was furrowing her brows. The CE strength was easily determined. As they were absorbing life force from other creatures, it bloated their bodies, making them bigger. They were classified from rank F to A, with A being the highest. The cannon fodders were class F and E. They were usually around 3 meters of height. They usually had power levels below 1 million. Those were only feeding on weaker people like villagers or non-combatant. Class D and C were ranging from 1 to 5 million, which was represented by their height, going up to 10 meters of height. Class B CEs were only handled by the strongest warriors and race leaders. They were towering tall with 50 meters of height, and their power were hovering around an estimated 30 to 40 million. But the strongest of them, the A class, were different. They had different bodies than the other ones. They could be easily identified. Unlike the glue-like body type the other CEs had, their bodies were more solid. It looked like they were wearing full body armor of solid metal. It seemed that they evolved from the massive amount of life force they absorbed. They compressed all their energies into a 2-meter-tall body. They exuded tremendous amount of strength just with their bodies. Their speed and strength were immense. They became increasingly powerful after reaching this class, and until now only one has been cited, but it was not doubted that there are more of these. The only one cited was the one who injured the City Lord, and if it weren't for the fact that it, as all the other CEs, was unable to fire ki attacks or any other energy-based attacks, the City Lord would have died at its hands by now. Broly watched as the war unfold. Almost all the lower classes were eradicated, but instead of retreating, more Class Cs were appearing. There were even some who managed to break through to the 4th defense line before they were killed. After they came closer to Broly, he saw the life force in them. It was just radiating out of them, much more prominent than in every other person on the same level. After they died, the energy didn't fade or disperse like he previously thought. They didn't leave any corpses behind because the bodies would be converted into life force before flying uniformly away. It appeared that the energy they stored was flying towards somewhere, but Broly couldn't tell, whereas his senses weren't able to reach out far. Broly had a bad feeling about this, as he thought of a possibility. What if all the energy gathered in one place, forming a CE? If that was the case, it would mean that he tremendously underestimated this enemy. Broly steeled his heart as he watched them slaughter their enemies. After another 3 hours, the attacks ceased. They suffered minor losses, and the troops were exhausted. Another batch was heading out, scouting the area as a preemptive warning system, as the others went inside the city to rest. Broly and his group were not nearly as tired as the others, since they only gave a helping hand by shooting some key attacks from behind. Broly wanted to head in, transform into an Oozaru, and slaughter the enemies as well, but he restrained himself. His sudden presences would disrupt the flow of the veterans, and he alone wasn't enough to cover the whole battlefield. He couldn't just step out of line just because he felt like he wanted to do more. He would do more harm than good. Besides, he had a group to lead. He couldn't just go solo and leave them alone. Chapter 41. Absorb. Their rest was quick to pass. The next day, a lot of movement were registered. The army was already assembled, as well as Broly's group. They again stood on the wall watching the war unfold. Very similar to yesterday, the CE had increasingly powerful individuals in their ranks, which resulted in a few bypassing the 4th defense line. The defense line struggled hard to eliminate every CE that came attacking. After all, there were barely 100 who could go against the Class C, but there were more than just a few hundred who kept attacking. They were largely outnumbered. Weren't it for the fact that the CE were weak against key attacks, Elpis would have fallen already. The defense lines were threatened to break completely. The City Lord started to appear to reduce the stress on the other races' leaders and veterans. The City Lord was only supposed to appear when a Class A emerged, but he couldn't stand still after it escalated to such a degree. Even in the presence of the City Lord, the CE relentlessly were heading towards the wall. The last defense line had a somber face, as they saw the sheer size of the attack. They could feel the shockwaves from the clashes and smelled the blood that was spilled. They knew that they couldn't let even one through. Otherwise, it would lead to a massacre in the city. Every CE which broke through the 4th defense headed towards Broly, apparently attracted to his tail. Broly wanted to meet them head-on. He didn't use any key attacks. He wanted to know if they could extract his life force. As he could control his life force, he was confident to negate their influence, but he wanted to test it out before it gets even more serious. Aaliyah, if you see me not handling it, just shoot some ki blast. It is better to be injured than have my life force absorbed. All right. Broly dashed forward directly at the closest. He crossed the few hundred meters distance in an instant. He dived under the slash of the first CE. Without stopping, he rushed at the one right behind the first and punched out. It was sent flying, without any resistance. The second could hardly react to the sheer speed that Broly displayed. Without waiting, he span around and kicked the approaching CE away. He quickly followed up. Before the CE could rebalance itself in the air, Broly already appeared above him and punched him into the ground, immediately creating a huge crater. Broly wasn't going to stop with that. He quickly crashed towards the crater. With his fingers extended, he stabbed into the chest of the CE. Before he could pull his hand out, the CE started fading. The second CE finally caught up to Broly and tried to attack from the back, but was quickly hit by a ki blast from Aaliyah. It was badly injured by the surprise attack. It bled its black liquid onto the ground, which quickly faded as well. Broly didn't hesitate and grabbed the head of the CE with one hand and the body with the other. He tore apart the head from the body and threw it onto the ground like garbage. Both parts faded away and Broly retreated to the wall. And how was it? Aaliyah asked him, seeing Broly in thoughts as he looked at his hand. Can they absorb your life force? No, but I can. What? I can absorb their life force. The others were surprised by the revelation. It was unheard of someone forcefully absorbing foreign life force, of course with the exception of the CEs themselves. It was surprising as the CE's main strength was absorbing life force. This was what they made them so dangerous. Now not only have they failed to absorb Broly's, but were absorbed by its target instead. Aaliyah stepped forward. Can you absorb my life force? She struck out her arm, waiting for Broly to grasp it. Broly thought for a moment before holding her arm. He tried to forcefully absorb Aaliyah's life force, but to no avail. No reaction at all. Maybe there are other conditions? Broly thought out aloud. Never mind. Focus on the war again. He tried to direct his attention towards the ongoing war as well, but he couldn't help but feel a bit distracted. The life force he just absorbed was astonishing pure. It seemed to enhance his own life force, purifying it. Although the changes were minuscule, they were still there. From the corner of his eye, he saw someone dashing forwards to the 4th defense line. HM? Hey! It was Kana, who rushed forwards. Stop! Broly roared as he quickly followed behind. Kana! Fuck! What is she doing? Taro cursed as he and Aaliyah tried to follow them, but they were stopped by A's. Wait, we have to stay. The last defense would have a huge hole without us. Let Broly bring her back. Aaliyah, you too. You are the second strongest of us. We can't afford you guys to leave.
But
Aaliyah tried to say something but couldn't refute his words. Taro furrowed his brows in dissatisfaction, but didn't say anything. Broly almost caught up on her, as he saw her firing key blasts at a few CEs which were overpowering 2 veterans, a woman and a man. He saw how they struggled to keep themselves alive. Broly accelerated until he looked like a beam flying directly at the attacking CEs. He crashed into one of them, plunging his entire arm inside the chest of one. Again, he felt it to be surprisingly easy to absorb its life force. The other CE was taken care of by Kana. Broly already saw through the life force that both were already dead. Before he could pre-mate her for her actions, he saw her quickly ran up to the woman's corpse, checking on her. Not feeling a pulse, she panicked before trying to give the woman a healing capsule. Kana, they are already dead. You can't save them. Go back to your position. Broly furrowed his eyebrows after she saw her running to the man giving him a capsule as well. He saw that more CEs were approaching, but also the reinforcement from the city headed this way. They had to go back, otherwise there would be too many at one place. He already attracted the CEs with his tail, and the flow of the battle in the 3rd and 4th row already slowly shifted towards their direction. They quickly had to move. Kana. I thought I saw my parents. She was still sitting next to the woman with her head down. We don't have time for this. We are going back. Broly grabbed her arm, forcing her up and sprinted towards their original position.
no.
I will kill every last one of them. Broly suddenly felt a finger being pulled. While running, he looked back at her. He saw her gripping his index finger and her key flaring up. Arg! Kana broke his finger and quickly escaped his grasp. After he loosened up, she shot towards the front line. You. Chapter 42, Super Saiyan. You.
Broly's eyes went cold as he looked at the fast-fleeing Kana.
Crack. He readjusted his finger before turning into a blur. Kana only saw red. She only wanted to kill them all. The more she saw them kill soldiers, the angrier she became. She was almost at the first defense line until a figure suddenly appeared in front of her. Without time to dodge, she crashed into it. It didn't even budge for a centimeter. The figure was Broly, but before she could say something, she was grabbed by the throat. The next moment they moved at high speed away from the battlefield. Kana struggled to get out of his grasp, but this time, she couldn't even pull a finger. The hand wouldn't move. It was like steel claw wrapped around her throat. A few hundred kilometers away from the battle, they stopped. Shortly afterwards, she was thrown to the ground, bouncing a few hundred meters until she stopped. Cough, cough. She slowly got up. She was slightly injured by the casual throw. Broly, what are you doing? We have to go back, help them. Broly's eyes went cold after hearing her screaming. Help? You helped none with your actions. You probably haven't even realized what you did. Wadash, do you know why we were stationed at the very back? She got irritated because she saw that he was hellbent to talk. Because we have never participated in a war. Now see dash. Yes, but war is messy. Why are they so fixated that we stay in the back? The reason for this because we can't restrain our life force. Every soldier which is fighting out there has been fighting against them for years. They know the basic. They can restrain it. Obviously not completely, which would be asking for too much, but to the degree that it is almost the same level than the others in their defense line. This leads to the CE spreading out equally on the battlefield. Why are you dash? Now what happens when someone inexperienced just runs through 3 defense lines? It's like a torch in the dark for the CE. They probably were after you and your ta dash. I can control my life force and it is not difficult to hide my tail. You just didn't think. Now before you fuck off to the city, Broly suddenly turned into a beam, instantly appearing in front of Kana, punching her stomach. Like a cannonball, she shot through the air. Broly followed her quickly, giving her no time for recover. He surpassed her and kicked her upwards, but before she flew away, he grabbed her leg and slammed her into the ground. He slowly lifted her up by the leg, looking into her eyes, as blood dripped out of her mouth across the cheek to the ground. He let her fall to the ground. She groaned a bit before she slowly got up, staying wobbly on her feet. After I told you that you could be a Super Saiyan, You thought you could do everything on your own. You didn't take advices, even if it is from the City Lord. You ignore a planetary threat and hole up in the training chamber. Now you ignore my orders, and the only time you do something is after you believe to have seen your parents. Your actions endangered not only you but every one of us. You were attracting a lot of CEs. If I didn't bring you out, you would be already dead. Broly paused for a bit. He saw that she was gritting her teeth. She obviously didn't want to hear all of it. What a way to disrespect your parents. They sacrificed their lives for you, and you just throw this chance away like you didn't even care. Well, after pushing everyone away and training for your revenge, it is not like you had a life to begin with. You don't know anything. They are my family. If I can't take revenge, I would have survived for nothing. She was already trembling from anger and sadness. Survived for nothing? Aaliyah told me how you described your family to her. If you really think that they wanted you to take revenge for them, maybe they weren't as caring as you say they were. Shut up. An incredible force suddenly radiated out of Kana, and her hair started to rise as she growled. Broly quickly distanced himself from her. The earth started to tremble as lightning hit the ground. This is... Broly quickly looked at the full moon in the sky, which he avoided the entire time the war was ongoing. His body rapidly expanded, and fur grew on his body. He transformed into an Oozaru. He again directed his focus on Kana, who was trembling. Her hair started to shine in a golden light from time to time. Broly could feel the energy coming from Kana. The air was electrified as more and more lighting started to rain upon the earth. You know nothing, she screamed through her teeth. The ground below her crumbled into tiny bits before flying into the air. Broly squinted his eyes as he saw that. Her base strength has risen to 4 million in the past 2 years. With the multiplier of Super Saiyan, he would hardly be a match for her in his Oozaru form. Ah! A golden aura shot out of her, enveloping her completely as she screamed out. Her hair turned completely golden. For a short moment her pupils disappeared before green eyes stared at him. The pressure Broly felt from the gaze was immense. You going to pay for what you have said? Goddamn it. She disappeared from his sight. He looked around, searching for her. Suddenly she was right in front of his face. He saw her, punch out, but he couldn't react at all. He was sent flying into a small hill, completely crumbling under his weight. He heard several bones crack from his face. He quickly got up only to see her flying in front of him again. This time he just punched out. Kana didn't dodge, instead met it with a punch of her own. From the outside perspective, everyone would think that the punch from the 30-meter-tall giant would entirely crush the ant-like opponent. But the exact opposite happened. His punch bounced back over his head. Kana seemingly teleported to his now open side and punched out again. Arg! Broly stumbled a few dozens of steps back as he held his now bloody side. Several ribs were broken, as was his arm. Without giving him any rest, she appeared slightly above him, with her fingers intertwined and her arms up in the air. She quickly struck down on top of his head into the ground. He felt dizzy after he heard a crack from the top of his head. He lay down on the ground heavily wounded before he felt a sharp pain from his backside. He looked back only to see his tail being ripped off. He quickly reverted back. Without giving her time to prevent it, he threw a few healing capsules in. She looked at his actions with narrowed eyes. The several capsules did their wonder. They regained its ability of instantly healing of the fruit of life. Although it had some side effect, Broly didn't care right now. He stood up and looked at Kana. So, what are you going to do now? Without your Oozaru form, your strength is not even close to mine, she said while throwing the reverted tail away. That doesn't make my words any less true. Tisage. Appearing in front of him, she punched his face. This time Broly wasn't sent flying. He stumbled a few meters with his head bent backwards. He stopped and leaned back forwards. Chapter 43. The Legend. Broly's gaze was filled with rage. There were bulging veins on his face. Kana was stunned for a second, before reassuring herself. Humph. I am the legendary Super Saiyan. You can do nothing to me. You ignorant brat. Only because you transformed ahead of me, you think you can beat me? Unconsciously she stepped back, as she felt Broly's ki rising. Broly was enveloped by his green ki which pierced into the heavens. Yuwa-aha. Fwa. The earth was trembling. The ground broke apart. Broly's ki was rapidly rising. It felt like his strength was limitless. Black clouds sprawled across the sky. Lighting illuminated the night as bolts of white lightning shot towards Broly. The broken ground beneath them crumbled into dust as it flew into the sky. Kana was terrified as she felt the frightening energy spewing out of Broly. Her legs started shaking under pressure Broly gave off. She couldn't help but distance herself a few meters backwards. No trace of her previous arrogance to be seen. Dash. Broly suddenly stopped laughing. The sky turned quite as if the previous thunderstorm was just an illusion. His green ki retracted into his body. Crack. Broly's skin started to crack as green light shone out of his body. A terrifying roar came out of Broly's mouth. Boom. His body exploded as the energy burst out of him. A spherical explosion started growing, destroying anything in its path. Impulses of green light erupted out of him, changing the light scheme of this planet into a green one, before gathering back to him. Kana was sent flying by the shockwave. Only after a few hundred meters was she able to regain her foothold. She couldn't believe what she saw. Why you, B. Broly? In the 100-meter massive crater stood a 2'5" tall figure. A man with a massive frame and bulging steel-like muscles. Broly stood there as his green flame-like ki was enveloping his whole body. His hair turned completely green and stood on end. His pupils disappeared, leaving only white back. Kana was barely able to hold her ground as she looked into his complete white eyes. Her instinct was telling her to run, to escape. She couldn't help but fear the man who stood in front of her. She tried to move, but she couldn't. Her body wasn't obeying her anymore. The legend was the only thing she could mutter. She fell backwards onto her butt as her face was filled with terror. Broly growled, seemingly struggling with this immense power. His body was tense, twitching from time to time. A moment later, he started to relax again as he showed a smile. But in his current form, he seemed even more evil with it. It looked like a devil's smile, a simple smile conveying his sadistic nature. He was mocking her as he watched her tremble before him. So, you are the legendary Super Saiyan. Ha ha ha, what a joke. I show you what the legend really prophesied. The only payment, your life? Kana shrieked as she heard this, still sitting on the ground. She seemed to have flashbacks from the time she thought she would die with her father. Thinking that today would be the day she dies, surprisingly gave her courage to stand back up and face Broly. Oh? Heh. It wouldn't be fun otherwise. Haha. With these words, he disappeared from Kana's eyes, before she felt her head being grabbed and being picked up. She struggled to get out, but she couldn't budge the hand. Her backward kicks had no effect. Suddenly, she felt something hit her. It felt like a comet struck her back, sending her flying thousands of kilometers, only to be stopped by the mountainside nearby. She was coughing out blood and panted heavily. The one hit already brought her to the verge of death. She was embedded in the mountainside. She took out some healing capsules, with her still intact arm. Her back almost snapped with the one punch he gave her. She needed to recover fast. As she took in the healing capsules, she saw a massive figure standing at the entrance of the little cave she created on impact. He was watching her heal. She could see that he was unconcerned even if she completely recovered. She saw his smile, revealing his intention to torture her. Didn't you say I wouldn't be near you in strength? Ha 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 ha. Phew, take this. Having recovered, she turned around and shot out a ki blast. But she didn't stop. She kept firing ki blasts endlessly. Only after a few minutes, after she exhausted herself, she stopped and popped in another healing capsule to recover her lost ki. A huge smoke screen was created, and a huge figure just walked through it. Under the barrage of her ki blasts, half of the mountain was blown up, but he was completely unfazed. There was not even a scratch on him. Even his clothes were fine. Humph. This all you got? He mocked her with a grin. If that's the case, it is my turn. He straightforwardly grabbed towards her head again. Seeing this, she used a ki sphere to stop the approaching hand. That's what was supposed to happen. The hand didn't even slow down as he grasped her golden hair. He lifted her up and smashed her into the ground. Thunder-like explosions sounded out as he repeatedly hammered her head into rocks. Her face was completely bloody. Her eyes were unfocused. She nearly lost consciousness due to the hit to her head. She felt dizzy and had this strong urge to just lie down and sleep. She could feel then, Broly put a capsule in her mouth. She was slowly recovering. Her focus came back, but before she could try to escape, she was picked up by her leg and flung down the mountain. After she landed, she quickly used the ground to keep her momentum and tried to flee. All of a sudden, a voice sounded out right behind her, making her look over her shoulder. Let me help you. Ha ha ha, Broly said while pushing his palm, which held a small energy sphere, closer to her back. Boom. She slid across the floor, bouncing a couple of times before landing inside a small pond. Broly quickly followed her in and fished her out. He held the unconscious Kana up by the throat. She was already out of her Super Saiyan transformation and was already 1 foot in the grave. He slapped her a couple of times, until she woke up in a groan. He forced her to eat another healing capsule, which would only extend her suffering. One capsule couldn't heal the dozens of broken bones all over her body. Her head had suffered the worst injuries. Broly started to squeeze his hand, which he held her throat with. It started cracking, as Kana could only release quiet groans. Boom. He let Kana fall in surprise and turned around. Broly saw Aaliyah with an outstretched arm, indicating her as the criminal that shot his back. Aiz and Taro approached from the sides as well. Chapter 44. Will. Broly, what are you doing? She is going to die. Aaliyah screamed as she saw Kana laying on the ground. Her whole body was covered in blood. There were numerous cuts and bruises all over her. Her arm was bent at odd angle. She was obviously heavily injured. There would not be needed much to kill her. What are you doing here? Why are you not at the defense line? Broly furrowed his brows, becoming displeased by the tone Aaliyah used. They retreated after the thunderstorm began. What is going? Why does she look like that? She just took responsibility for her actions. Broly smiled at them. Taro gulped as he saw this. The pressure Broly unconsciously released was unreal. They all felt like they were thousands of meters underwater. They could hardly move their body after he locked onto them. Aaliyah tried to walk past him towards Kana to give her a healing capsule, but she was stopped by an outstretched arm. I think you should leave. This has nothing to do with you. Broly spoke as he squinted his eyes. Aaliyah could not help but picture herself being torn apart if she made another step. But she had to. Although they distanced themselves a bit from each other, Kana and she were still friends. Don't you think it's enough already? Look at her, she can barely move. Broly sensed that Taro was slowly inching forward. He could see that Taro was incredibly nervous. His legs and arms were slightly shaking. Broly, I think you should calm down first. You are clearly not yourself. Oh, that's what you think. No, I have not lost my mind. Ha 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 ha. He grinned as he looked at them, who were fearing to make a move. Ah! With a key shockwave, he sent them flying. Suddenly, a figure dashed towards the unconscious Kana and picked her up. Oh, you don't. Broly shouted as he threw a key sphere at Aize and Kana, but before it reached them, it was blasted away. Aaliyah shot it away. As Taro rushed towards Broly with a punch, Broly just tanked it as he looked at him and slapped him out of his way. He saw Aize flying away with Kana. Aaliyah positioned herself between them. Broly, stop. She is still our friend. She made a mistake, but she doesn't deserve to die. She cried out. The way I see it, she tried to kill me, so I will kill her. And if you stand in my way, you will suffer the same fate. Broly dash. Before she could say anything further, she was punched in her gut. Salvia was dripping out of her mouth. She kneeled on the ground with her face supporting her body. She used her hand to raise her upper body, only to be hit at in her neck, instantly passing out. Broly quickly shot through the air. It was only a matter of seconds before he caught up on them. Kana, it is time for you to die. He grabbed Aize at his shoulder and flicked him to the ground. Kana turned around. With a quick scream, her ki flared up in a golden light. Her muscles increased a bit. She turned into a Super Saiyan. Aize had to have given her few healing capsules to recover so quickly. With a mocking smile, he looked at her. Any last words? Hee. Kana only bit her lips as she looked at Broly and then at Aize in a crater on the floor, not moving. She reminisced the last few years she has struggled. Even as a Super Saiyan, her struggle would be in vain. She knew she couldn't escape him. She would be dying at the hands of the one she envied. She slowly lost her will to fight against Broly as she reminisced the last few years she has struggled. She looked at him. The one was born for greatness. His latent power and his battle awareness was constantly increasing. There was no way she could keep up with someone like this. With someone like him around, she would never be able to take revenge. After learning that she could become a Super Saiyan, she decided to put all her efforts into training. She only had one goal: to become stronger and kill this bastard Frieza before someone else could come ahead of her. She was stuck on the thought of revenge. She had to keep her mind occupied, otherwise she would think about her parents, her brother, her sister. Every night she would think about how they lived together, shared their meals, trained together, and quarreled about trivial things. She didn't know how lucky she was until she lost them. She would never be able to fight over food with her siblings, or spend time training with her father. She regretted not being able to say how much she loved them. She missed them so much. It teared apart her heart every night. She just couldn't handle it. She distracted herself with revenge, so she wouldn't need to deal with this pain. This way she could completely block it out. Not until now. Not until she saw how Aize, Taro, and Aaliyah were fighting for her sake, that she was so focused on her past that she didn't realize that she was slowly losing her friends around her, who cared for her. I'm sorry, I was stupid. It seems I didn't learn anything from my past. I didn't cherish the ones around me and endangered everyone with my foolishness. She clenched her fist as she said that. But this is why. This is why I can't die here. Not until I redeem myself. Ha! Her weakened golden ki flared up again, radiating in the night. Her ki was still weak, as she was still burdened by her wounds from the previous battle. But Broly saw that her eyes had changed. Instead of the arrogance or the fear, they were filled with determination. Should have this insight earlier. Broly grinned as he pulled his fist back. He enveloped his hand and thrusted it at her, while Kana was throwing both her arms forward, shooting out ki blasts at the approaching fist. A huge explosion encompassed both of them. A figure with golden hair fell like a rock through the air to the ground, hitting the ground without slowing down, creating a crater on impact. Her arms were bloody, her ears were ringing, and her sight was hazy. You warg. Suddenly she was hit in the stomach. She could see Broly standing on top of her. His hand had a green hue to it, as he grabbed towards her. Chapter 45. Newcomers. Whoosh. For 2-meter-tall figures suddenly appeared around him, completely in what seemed to be black armor. They were Class A Cs. Broly sensed that was not all of them. More and more Cs of Class B emerged from the surrounding. Their gigantic bodies blocked out the light, casting massive shadows. They stopped moving until they completely surrounded him without leaving a single gap for him to escape. The 4 Class A suddenly rushed forwards, attacking Broly from all sides. Broly easily dodged all of their attacks, only by leaning slightly to his sides. He rushed out of their encirclement and headed towards a 50-meter-tall CE and struck out with a punch. On impact, the head of the CE exploded, turning into a tiny bit of black liquid before quickly disappearing. Broly again felt the pure life force he drained from them and looked at the others who have surrounded him. If he could absorb their life force, his would leap up another qualitative level. He started hunting down the weaker Class B CEs, quickly killing dozens of them. They could hardly resist Broly in his legendary form. Even their highest Class A were no match for him. The CEs seemed to notice this. The Class B distanced themselves, watching as the higher ranks battled against Broly. Broly was surprised by their combat power. The weakest of them reached the strength of someone who had a power level of 200 million. A force to be reckoned with even in the vast universe, if he takes what he had seen in the series for a fact. The strongest of them were double as strong as their weakest, but they still couldn't even scratch him. His battle power wasn't a simple 50 times multiplier from his base, but a lot higher. The weakest of them appeared behind him and delivered a kick in the back of his head. Without looking, he grabbed and pulled it to front and stabbed out into the chest with his free hand. He felt the rush of the life force flowing into him, but unlike the lower classes, he couldn't absorb everything. A good part of it flew elsewhere. The other Class A didn't stop attacking and bombarded him with attacks. Broly killed his way from bottom to the top. First, the second weakest died, quickly followed by the other 2 in an unceremonial manner. They were swiftly disposed of in only a few minutes. From time to time they roared, but Broly was dissatisfied with their reaction, so he didn't play with them, hence their quick deaths. After killing all the Class A's, the lower Class C emerged and charged at him. The Class B watched from the backs. Broly frowned as he saw that. It would hardly benefit him to kill them one-on-one, and it would take too much time as he had to make physical contact to absorb it. So instead of wasting his time with those Class CS, he directly dashed towards the Class B in the distance. But they didn't have any of it. When they saw him approaching, they fled. Obviously, they couldn't truly escape but waste a few seconds. Broly noticed this as well. They didn't appear to fear death, but only wanted to stall for time. They were waiting for something. As if reading his mind, a blur appeared behind him out of nowhere. He couldn't sense its life force or any other energy leaking out of it. He was only able to see it in the corner of his eye, as it clawed at him. Without thinking, he thrusted his arm out, slapping the attack from this figure away. The directed shockwave the attack generated destroyed a small hill a few hundred of meters away. Broly rotated around while punching with his other hand at this newcomer. It blocked the attack and was sent flying a few meters before stopping again in the air. Now Broly could take a better look at it. Now seeing him with his eyes, he could again see the immense life force they had in them. Everything was very similar to the Class ACEs with the exception of its face. Instead of the featureless face, a male Saiyan face welcomed him. Its eyes were completely black as well, the veins running through it. Boom. An explosion sounded out behind Broly. He looked back to see another of these CEs throwing backwards out of the created explosion. A golden comet-like figure shot towards him, positioning behind him. Surprisingly, it was Kana who saved him from the ambush. What do you think you are doing? This pathetic heroic act won't change my attention to kill you. He only glanced at her for a second and let her position herself in his back before watching the CE's movements again. He was not afraid of her. Even if Kana wanted to attack him now, it would still better to ignore her than attack and potentially expose an opening. Besides, even if she doesn't want to, she would distract at least one of those CEs away from him. Kana bitterly smiled, but her eyes were still filled with determination. I know. You can kill me after we annihilated those things. At least this way I can pay back my debt, even if it is only by helping you get rid of them. Humph. You think I need the help of a weakling like you? You shouldn't, since they only have the strength of an upper class A, but I saw how you almost get ambushed by them twice, so I thought there might be something wrong with them. They were only able to ambush me because they don't leak any energy. Kana looked at him confused, before speaking. They do. Although I'm not well versed in sensing, I still feel the tremendous power they give off. While they were talking, another 2 of these CEs with faces appeared and surrounded them. Stop bullshitting me. Why are you even still alive? On K with his scream, the other side started attacking again. Broly confirmed that he couldn't sense any life force or pressure from them. He couldn't even clearly hear them. If he didn't use his eyes to look at the life force of them, he wouldn't even be able to see them. What the fuck is going on? He couldn't detect any anomalies with his senses if he spread it out. He could clearly feel the trees, small insects, and the other CEs. Only these newcomers were a complete blind spot for him, if it weren't for the fact that he could manipulate the life force in his eyes to see theirs. They have a way to escape my senses, but why only mine? Kana doesn't seem to have that problem. He saw her fight one of those newcomers, but was well dominated by it. She was sent flying with a punch, but the CE didn't follow to finish her, instead dashed towards Broly. You are after me? Ha ha ha. Even without my senses, you trash will always be trash.